Welcome. It's wonderful to see you this morning.
Good morning. Whether you're here in person, joining us online, or watching later on YouTube, welcome to First Parish in Concord. I'm Reverend Seth Carrier-Ladge, your interim senior minister. My pronouns are he, him. If you're online, please feel welcome to participate fully in the chat. If you're here in person and have questions about accessibility or the building, please see our ushers or any worship leader. Masks are optional throughout our building, including in this space. We continue to use enhanced ventilation and encourage masking to keep our communal spaces safe for everyone. I invite everyone present now to wave to those folks who are joining us online. Oh, is the camera coming? Where is it pointing? Maybe, maybe not. Oh, maybe we'll try it again in a minute. I got a couple other things to say. I'll come back to that. I'm holding on to that piece of paper. Okay. We are now in our second Sunday of using the new screens in our sanctuary and our seventh Sunday with the new sound system. We received feedback last week that the screens were too bright, and the worship team thought so too. So we did some investigating, and it turns out that they were set at the highest ultra-bright, ultra-vivid settings. Imagine that. So we've turned the brightness way down and the vividness off, so hopefully they're much easier on the eyes this week. Thank you to everyone who has shared your experience with us using the feedback form so far. We've read it all and are doing our best to make appropriate adjustments. Please continue to send us your feedback via the survey, which you can get to using the QR code in your order of service. All right, are we able to wave to the, no, maybe not. All right, well, people on Zoom, we love you. We're waving to you, and yeah, we are waving to you. Okay. Cool. However you are joining us this morning, thank you for coming. We're glad you're here. Our announcements. After the service, we have Worship Sharing Circle, a small group conversation about the service theme in the Brooks Room in person and on Zoom. We also have Coffee Hour, a less structured way to connect. Zoom, you just stay on after the service. In person, you can get your coffee in the kitchen and mingle in the parish hall. Okay. We should have a standing committee rep here today. I'm told that's Virginia Taylor. Is that true? Yeah, there's Virginia. So if you have any questions about governance or things happening in the church, you can talk to her. Also today, after the service, the Membership and Welcoming Committee is having a kickoff event in the parlor at 11:30 a.m. If you're interested in helping them with the work of building relationships with each other and with newcomers, stop by and say hi. Finally, mark your calendars for Sunday, October 1st after the service. Our very own Peter Bowden will be leading a congregation-wide seminar exploring the impact of digital life on Unitarian Universalist congregational growth, outreach, and membership development. We hope you'll attend. See your Sunday announcement sheet for more details about the seminar and many other things happening in the upcoming weeks at First Parish. And now, please rise in body or spirit as we sing our opening hymn, number 287, Faith of the Larger Liberty. Our call to worship this morning is by Sherry Woodbury. Here we are in our circle again, a circle of vision and reflection, a forum for deciding and empowering. Here we are at the base of another bridge, another space spanning the shores of today and tomorrow, beckoning us to cross the chasm one day at a time. Here we are, gathered again at the cusp of the future, at the boundary that holds community together. We are here in a circle of love and trust, brought to this moment by a series of choices and promises, by hope and gratitude, by our own shadows, faced and befriended. With a servant's heart, with a leader's listening, with a parent's love, truer than all our inner trembling, let us model the health we seek for all and lean into community. Somewhere out there, all we dream is possible. Somewhere in here, we are sowing the seeds. May Woodbury's words guide us now into this sacred time and space. Come, let us worship together. Oh, look, our chalice is already lit. How wonderful. Let us join now in saying our unison chalice lighting response. O flame of our faith,
Good morning. And Happy New Year, not only to my Jewish friends who are celebrating Rosh Hashanah, but to our program here at Parish. We are beginning our religious exploration this Sunday. So I am so excited to have all ages in the pews, and I'm excited for the session that comes after. Charlie, you can sit back down. We're not going yet. So today, I have a story to share with you that is a true story. It is a remarkable story, however, from our Unitarian heritage. And those of you who are longtime Unitarian Universalists will be like, oh yes, I know this story. And some of you may never have heard it before. Did you know that we had once, only once in the history of the world, a Unitarian king? If you knew, raise your hand. I bet you so many know. So many know, of course. His name was King John Sigismund, and he was the leader of Transylvania, which at one time was a part of Hungary and is now a part of Romania. There has been a lot of turmoil in that part of the world, and there continues to be turmoil today. But Transylvania, hold on one moment while I get my notes. I think this is so beautiful. Transylvania is known as the land through the forest. I think that is so beautiful. And we have pilgrims from our congregation who are about to visit our partner congregation in Transylvania, and you will see it is as beautiful as that name alludes to. But back to our historic story. King John Sigismund became king when he was only 21 years old, and he was known as a kind and thoughtful ruler. And that was important because there was much fighting all around Transylvania at that time, and there was fighting within his country. The story that I've read says it was a little country, but it was surrounded by big trouble. And there were 4 different religions. There were actually more than that, of course, but this is the 4 that we're highlighting in the story: Roman Catholicism, Lutheran, Calvinist, and what would become known as Unitarianism. And people were fighting about the nature of God, the nature of Jesus, and the nature of the church. Unfortunately, this sort of fighting about religion still happens around the world and even close to home. But King John Sigismund, instead of proclaiming that all people should believe as he did, decided, no, we should have a more civil way of talking about this controversy. And so he called for debate. and he brought together leaders from each of those religions, and the debate was known as the Diet of Torda, because it was in a village called Torda, which those of us who have gone to Transylvania have had an opportunity to go visit. This debate went on for 10 days. And it began at 5 o'clock in the morning, each morning. This painting, which many of you may have seen before, is a very famous one, and it often hangs in Unitarian churches, both in Transylvania and across the United States. You often see, though, a more grainy black and white photograph of the print of the painting. In the center, you'll notice there is a man with his hand on his heart and his arm raised towards heaven, and it has a wonderful shaft, a dramatic shaft of light coming down. That is Francis David. And he was representing the Unitarian perspective, and he was also known as a very kind and thoughtful man and a reformer. And his perspective was that no one should be able to tell you what to believe about the nature of God. And his arguments were so convincing that King John Sigismund ultimately became Unitarian. But he didn't say, oh, he is the winner of this debate, and that all people in Transylvania should become Unitarian. He said that he created an edict, the Edict of Torda. And mind you, this was a long time ago. This was over 400 years ago. The date, in fact, and I have to look at my sheet because there are many that will correct me if I get the date wrong. We all have our fortes, right? The date of the Diet of Torda is 1568. Can you imagine? Over 450 years ago, this was happening, right? So, when, at the end of this debate, King John made an important announcement, that Edict of Torda, that told people they could debate about the idea of religion, but they must not fight, punish, or kill each other about their religion, and every church and every person must follow their own beliefs. That doesn't seem that remarkable, but it truly was. And unfortunately, Francis David, his fortunes changed when the reign of King John Sigismund ended. He was imprisoned and he died in a dungeon. We as Unitarian Universalists particularly remember King John because his law made it safe for our siblings in Transylvania to become Unitarians. And this was an important step in the establishment of our Unitarian faith. And this ideal of religious freedom is deeply meaningful to our community, both here and in Seki Karastur, where we are about to go back and visit our dear siblings in faith. She's got her own mic.
So, there have been Unitarian churches in Transylvania for 450 years, in one way or another. And the United States, Unitarian congregations in the United States have had relationships, or have at least been aware of these congregations for almost a century and a half. Although for a long time in Transylvania and Romania, under the communist government, it was very hard for us to be in touch. We were there as witnesses. The Romanian government knew that we were watching. American churches were watching. But in 1989, there was a revolution in Romania, and the communist government fell. And in January of 1990, our Minister Emeritus, Gary Smith, and a delegation from this area went to Transylvania to reconnect. And came back and had met the people, had heard their story, and were interested in forming a partnership. And in 1993, a partnership was established between First Parish in Concord and the Unitarian Church in Seki Karastur. Say that, Seki Karastur. Excellent. In Transylvania. It's a town about the size of Concord, actually, and you can see a picture of it. And I came to First Parish in the fall of 1994, and Gary Smith and a group had just been to Transylvania in September of 1994, and a trip very much like the one we're about to embark on. And he gave a sermon in October talking about his 9 days in Transylvania that connected this congregation in a way that was very memorable. And it struck me in particular. I was entranced by this ancient faith and the fact that we had these ties. And I started to think, wouldn't it be cool if a choir went over there and sang? And in 2002, we did that. We took 30 choir members, 32 choir members, 44 people altogether, including some youth and some other church leaders. And we went over and were able to establish, because of this large group of people, there had been some smaller delegations that went before, but because of this large group of people, there were personal connections that were made, there were institutional connections that were made between our youth programs, between our governance, and we established this really strong partnership with Sacred Stewart. You can see their beautiful sanctuary, where we'll be worshiping next week during their Thanksgiving celebrations. So I'll just say personally, this will be my 8th trip over to Sacred Stewart. I've gone with choir trips, I've gone with folks from this congregation, I've gone with folks from other congregations. It seems very important for us to go now for a number of reasons. We have been separated by COVID for the last 5 years. Both of our congregations have been in transition. They have new ministers. We have interim minister and are in transition. And this is the 30th year of our partnership, 30 years. And it's the Thanksgiving. So we'll be going over to celebrate with them and to be part of them. And hopefully we will come back with some stories that will make your heart want to go to Transylvania.
I hope you come back too, Beth. We have a blessing now for all of you who are traveling for the upcoming trip. For anybody who's here who's going on the trip, could you just raise your hand so we can see who you folks are who are here? Awesome. These are the people we're blessing. You can put your hands down. This blessing for travelers is adapted from Angela Herrera. This is a blessing for all the travelers, for the ones who start out in beauty, who fall from grace, who step gingerly, looking for the way back. And for those who are born into the margins, who travel from one liminal space to another, crossing boundaries in search of center. This is a blessing for the ones whose births are passing from darkness to darkness, who all their lives are drawn toward the light and keep moving. And for those whose journeys are a winding road that begins and ends in the same place, though only when the journey is completed do they finally know where they are. For all the travelers, young and old, aching and joyful, weary and full of life, the ones who are here and the ones who are not here, the ones who are like you, and they're all like you, and the ones who are different, for in some ways we each travel alone. This is a blessing and a prayer for traveling mercies and sure-footedness, for clear vision, for bread, for your body and spirit, for water, for your safe arrival, and for everyone you see along the way. Friends, as you embark on your journey together, you go with our blessings. Be well, be safe, return soon. Amen.
So our Little RE program for preschoolers and kindergartners has already begun down in the Milldam Nursery School space. So if anyone has young children they'd like to bring down there at that time, they're welcome to do so. I want to invite our RE guides to come join me up here so that the children can see who you are. We have some fabulous adult volunteers who are leading our programs today. The 4th and 5th grade UU tweens are going to head outside to the tent by the herb garden. The kindergarten through 3rd graders are going to go upstairs to the Emerson room, and the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders are going to go up with me and the other Amy up to the Greeley and the Ripley rooms. Let us join together in song.
I'm gonna give them a chance to settle down. All right. So our offering this month, with our group headed off to visit our partner church in Transylvania, is that we're sharing half of our collection with Gondvi Shalish, and I butchered that, but that's okay, a Unitarian organization in Transylvania whose name loosely translates as Caring About Problems, which is connected to our partner church. We are grateful for your support of the work we do both inside and beyond these walls. Thank you for your generous gifts. We will now give and receive this morning's offering. Our reading this morning is an excerpt from Fail, Fail Again, Fail Better by Pima Children. She wrote, "Our organism is very much programmed toward seeking comfort and avoiding discomfort at any cost. At a very primitive level, we associate discomfort, which can come from feeling like we've failed, with danger. So even if the discomfort is subtle, a small discomfort, at some level our brain processes it as danger, something to get rid of. I feel that we as human beings need a lot of help to support us in not running away from what is unpleasant and insecure and seemingly dangerous. In other words, I would say that the drive to blame ourselves or others comes from our inability to stay present with what is, because the sense of failure challenges us. It's uncomfortable, unpleasant. We can begin to understand that we can be with those feelings of failure, to allow those feelings, and even train ourselves to say, I haven't done anything wrong. I'm not a bad person. I'm not a failure. I'm not a mess up. I haven't blown it. Or, fundamentally, I am good, and I can allow this feeling. I can stay with this feeling for now, maybe 2 seconds, or maybe 4 seconds, or maybe even longer. I'm very inspired myself as a teacher to communicate ways to help people not run away, to help people take the view that they can allow whatever comes up, uncomfortable feelings, for example. And then secondly, to teach methods of different kinds to help others stay present. Here ends our reading. As we have heard already this morning, our Jewish siblings, and some among us with Jewish heritage and identity, are currently celebrating the Jewish High Holy Days. Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, was this past Friday, and Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, is a week from today. The 10 days between these holidays is a time in the Jewish calendar for introspection and repentance. And I have to say, from a spiritual and theological perspective, I'm a little jealous. One of Judaism's most sacred holidays, celebrated with intention every year, revolves around a practice of self-reflection and building self-awareness. I want that for us in Unitarian Universalism. We don't talk very often in Unitarian Universalist theological circles about the importance of introspection and self-awareness, and I wish we did. We often lift up the fourth principle, our free and responsible search for truth and meaning, as being central to Unitarian Universalism. And there is some introspection present there implicitly. Presumably, if you're searching for truth and meaning, part of that search involves looking within. There is no explicit statement, though, And in the 7 principles both and the new proposed revisions to Article 2 of our bylaws, the focus remains external on our relationships with other people and how we collectively want to be together in the world. And within our congregational life even, a lot of our focus is often outward focused on social justice issues and trying to make the world better. Now, don't get me wrong, all of what I just talked about is good, hugely important, yay. And I don't want to reduce or eliminate any of it. I just wish, like in Judaism, that we also lifted up and centered the importance of introspection and self-reflection as central to our journey of spiritual growth and evolution. Now, Judaism is not the only significant spiritual tradition to identify self-awareness as a vitally important spiritual practice. I imagine there's at least a few folks here who have been to a yoga class. Anybody? Yeah, 1 or 2. Yeah, okay, right? So, while many of us associate yoga with the physical movements and poses that one experiences as part of a yoga class, those are actually only one of the 8 limbs on the path towards enlightenment and Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. So just 1/8 is the poses. We're only going to talk about one other one, the second limb of the Yoga Sutras, which are the niyamas, or practices for self-discipline and spiritual observances. And one of the 5 niyamas is savadhyaya, or the practice of self-study and self-reflection. And savadhyaya is an important practice in yoga because of the kleshas. So kleshas are the barriers to enlightenment that the yogic tradition identifies. They're a negative mental state that clouds the mind, causing suffering. Klesha means poison in Sanskrit. And so there's 5 of the kleshas. Avidya, a delusion or ignorance, obscures the higher self by firmly establishing negative habits and preventing change. The other 4 are asmita, egoism, raga, attachment, devesha, repulsion, and abhinvesha, the will to live, which is a fear of death. But the really interesting thing is that avidya, the ignorance of true self, is described as the root of all the other kleshas. Because without awareness of self, we cannot begin to address the other problems. And so we can contrast this focus in Judaism and yoga with our Western culture. As Buddhist practitioner and author Kristen Neff writes in her book, Self-Compassion, in the West, we are raised to be knowledgeable, to work hard, and to be productive members of society. But no one teaches us to deal productively with our own emotions, especially the difficult ones. This mirrors what we heard in our reading today from Pema Chodron, that we tend to have difficulty being present to challenging emotions and experiences. To be present in face of difficult and uncomfortable emotions requires us to have some skill with self-awareness. Now, this is something I have been working on for years and years and years in my adult life, increasing my skill at emotional self-awareness, and I'm getting better at it, fortunately. But, it's an ongoing thing. So I had this experience a few weeks ago where I walked out of a meeting, my last meeting of the day, and I was like, I feel off. Something's not right. I feel I'm not quite sure. But then I had to get in the car and deal with traffic, and I got home and had dinner, and I was really stressed out at dinner. The kids, we have 4 kids. I think most of you know that, but we have 4 kids, and they were having a hard time, and it was chaotic and intense and loud, and I was way more stressed than I would have been with it normally. But I couldn't step out of what was going on. I was just, the whole meal I was stressed. And it wasn't until the kids were asleep and in bed, and I was downstairs by myself for a moment, where I was like, okay, there's something going on. And I finally had the time and space to sit and get quiet and pay attention. And I finally figured out, I was like, okay, I noticed at the end of that meeting that something was different, so it probably happened around then. And it turns out that somebody had made a request for me to do something differently in church process. Imagine that you all had requests for something different. And I thought I had addressed it. And it turns out it needed to be addressed a little bit more, that what I had done didn't quite get us there. Totally normal, right? We try things, we don't always get the solution right the first time. But when it was brought up to me again that my first attempt at addressing it hadn't gotten all the way there, for whatever reason, it hit a spot in me, the spot that says, nothing I ever do is good enough. And I didn't know in the moment, right? I didn't walk out of that meeting being like, oh my God, nothing I do ever do is good enough. It wasn't in my awareness, right? I was like, oh, I feel off. That was my feeling. And it showed up at dinner. Like, I was so, it was bubbling, right, sitting there. I was not present to my kids the way I wanted to be. But it wasn't until I was able to sit down and be present and pay attention that I was able to feel through the feelings and work through it so that I wasn't stuck there. So I'll just name again that just for me has been a super long journey. I mean, literally my whole adulthood. I was in therapy in my early 20s because I was struggling with anxiety, and I remember the practice of getting here. We had to talk through it in therapy. I'd come in and be like, ah! and the therapist was like, okay, so let's track through your week. Where did you get triggered? And I remember, I think I've shared this with you all before, but I remember the moment, the first time I caught it in the moment. It was at a lunch, and I didn't get the bag of chips that I want, right, this silly little thing, and I started spinning out, and I'm like, oh, I'm spinning out. And I got up and I went to the bathroom and I was like, oh, I couldn't do anything about it. I hadn't built my skill up yet. But I was like, I figured it out in the moment. So that was 15 years ago, right? Or longer now. I'm old. But anyways, this has been a long process and I'm still ongoing with it. So this is true for many of us, right? That whether we've been building the skill or not, we struggle sometimes to be aware of the reactions of what's going on for us. And it shows up in a lot of ways. When I was an undergraduate, I actually I was part of a mediation training so that I could become a certified mediator in the state of New York. And the biggest thing that they told us was that when you're serving as a mediator in a dispute that's come right to mediation, that very often the presenting issue is not the real issue, and that you need to ask questions and see if you can find out what the underlying issue is that needs to be resolved. And the reason for that is that we're often not aware, right? We're not aware, we have these feelings and we focus them somewhere. And whatever we're talking about isn't the real thing. So, I'm hoping we're getting to the point where we've established that self-awareness is a good practice. And it's not just an individual practice that it's important for, it's also important for us as communities. And so part of the search process and part of the interim ministry that we're going to do this year involves self-reflection. Right? We have begun this church year where the search committee for your next settled senior minister is formed and active. So as part of that, we're going to reflect together with the search committee and then with me and the transition team. We're going to work on some of this self-reflection and identity stuff. Now, that's great for the church. Hopefully you show up. Please show up. It would be lovely if you showed up for those. And the thing that I want to lift up for you is that we're going to do it as a community because there's structure in place, right? You are going to be asked. We are going to be asked. We're asking ourselves to do this. But in your own life, unless you've got a spiritual director or a therapist or someone who's asking you to do this, there isn't anybody who's going to be from a structural perspective saying, hey, will you do some self-reflection now, please? So, at least not explicitly. Because the other thing is that often life and the universe have a way of presenting us the same things for us to learn over and over again until we finally learn them. And now, you can choose to ignore those opportunities, but you can also choose to engage with them and try and learn from what they're trying to teach you. I'm imagining that some of you have heard some version of this story from someone else at some point in your life. Man, I have such a hard time keeping a job. The manager always finds something that I'm doing wrong. I can never seem to hold a job for longer than 6 months. What is wrong with these managers? What is the one consistent thing across all of those jobs? It's not the managers. Right? It's the person telling the story, something that they are bringing and something that's happening. So it is true that often things that happen are not our fault or simply things beyond our control, but it's also often true that it is easier and safer to blame the outside world when things go wrong than it is to look within and see how we're contributing to the challenges we experience. Right? As Pima children said, we don't like sitting with that uncomfortableness. So there's a lot of stuff going on inside us in our subconscious that we're often not aware of. Some of it's great, some of it not so great. When we can practice self-awareness, we start to get a sense of what's going on inside and the parts that we're contributing to the recurring patterns in our life. And as we talked about earlier, right, it's not just about recurring patterns. It's also sometimes just about being present to uncomfortable feelings. Feelings like sadness, anger, shame, grief, anxiety, fear. If someone says, hey, would you like to feel some anger? Or hey, would you like to feel shame right now? Usually we're like, nope, no thanks, right? But yet we actually have to choose to do that sometimes because the feelings don't go away. Right? If you don't feel them, they end up getting buried, and they often come out in different ways, sometimes sideways. And so it's actually really important to interrogate and be present to those feelings, even if they are uncomfortable. This can be especially true for men in our culture who are trained into toxic masculinity, who aren't supposed to have feelings, and it's also true for all of us. Some of us have been lucky enough to grow up in a family of origin where there was skill and experience with navigating feelings that was modeled to us and maybe even taught to us, but many of us weren't. Parker Palmer has a great quote that says, "Violence is what happens when we don't know what else to do with our suffering." Right? And to me, that's a self-awareness thing. When we're suffering and we don't know what to do with it, and it comes out as violence, whether physical or emotional or verbal. But when we're self-aware, we can try and work through some of our feelings and seek out healing and help healing if need be. So whether it's help with patterns of behavior or simply to navigate the feelings we experience as part of life, my encouragement to all of us is to engage in a practice of looking within. Yes, do it now because of the high holy days and because of this service perhaps if you are so moved, but also keep doing it. Because looking within and gaining self-awareness truly is a practice, and you'll only get better at it if you do it more than a couple of times per year. Now, just as a quick side note, if you're delving into this stuff, some of us have some real trauma, and you can get lost in that, and it can be really problematic. So seek out help if with a licensed professional, if that's something, if you want to do this and you need that, just as a side note. But coming back to the practice part of this, too often we don't put in the time necessary to build our skills of self-awareness. It's not just something you can say, oh, I need to be more self-aware, and there you are, right? It's actually something you have to work at. So you might try meditation once or twice and say, oh, this doesn't work for me, or any number of other spiritual practices, right? But you actually have to practice. So we give up on spiritual practices too often, or too quickly in my experience. But if I told you that I was planning to learn on how to play the violin, and that I took 2 lessons, I said, oh, I'm just not very good at it, you'd laugh at me, right? I heard a little laugh, right? Because no kidding, you only took 2 lessons. It takes years to learn to play the violin well. It's the same thing with self-awareness. It is a practice that I hope you all will consider engaging in on a regular basis over a long period of time. Maybe for you it's journaling every day. Maybe you like to walk the labyrinth. We have one out there if you'd like to on the patio. It's really lovely. Maybe you like meditation. Maybe for you it's yoga. Maybe it's a spiritual partner with whom you engage in regular self-reflective conversation. Whatever practice it is that speaks to you, that works for you, I encourage you to really embrace and prioritize practicing it in your life. May you, and may we together this year, embrace a practice of presence, a practice of being present to ourselves, to each other, to our feelings, and to this community. May it be so, and amen. This is the prayerful section of the service where people can share joys and sorrows. We share with sorrow the news that Kay Harvey, former First Parish member and long-serving front desk volunteer and supervisor, died on September 8th, 2023. We send our love, thoughts, and prayers to Kay's family. Is there anyone else who is on your heart and mind right now? If so, I invite you to call their names aloud or type them into the chat now. There is also often those people or experiences whom are difficult to name out loud sometimes. We pause for another moment of silence for all that remains unspoken on our hearts. Our prayer time this morning is going to be a little bit different. There is still much going on in the world, both joyous and sad, and we still hold that fullness in our hearts. And in just a moment, instead of praying with words, I'm going to instead invite you into a prayerful practice of presence. One note before we begin, please be mindful and do what is safe for you. Keeping in mind our reading from Pima Chodron, I do invite you, though, into the discomfort if this turns out to be uncomfortable for you. And if being present brings up old trauma or brings you to an unsafe space, please feel free to find a different way to be in prayer during this time that works for you. All right, so this practice we're about to begin comes from spiritual director Teresa Blythe. She calls it a practice of silence, practice of presence, potato. I invite you now to let go of your expectations and be silent and be present, if you can. We're going to be silent together for 2 whole minutes. Don't panic. It will be okay, I promise. It's funny how 2 minutes feels like not enough time to get almost anything done, but yet, unless you have a regular meditation practice, sitting quietly and not doing anything for 2 minutes is going to feel like a long time for many of us. So, 2 minutes of silence. And what I'm going to ask you to do during those silence is pick one of your senses, hearing, sight, touch, taste, or smell, and focus on that. And if and when your mind wanders from that sense and jumps about, say to yourself, I'm returning to this moment, and return to your direct experience of the sense you've chosen. Now, though we'll be in silence, there will, of course, still be sounds. Perhaps an ambulance will choose this moment to drive by, or maybe someone will cough, you'll hear the fan, a baby might make a joyful sound. Just observe them and let them slide on by. All right. Here we go. If you haven't picked your sense, I invite you to do so now, and let us enter together into 2 moments of shared silence and presence. And now I gently welcome you to come back into this shared space together. Or perhaps you never left. The lovely thing about practicing together is that it's not performance. It doesn't have to be perfect. We just need to practice. And we did that. And so I offer a prayer of gratitude on our behalf for the practice of presence we just shared together. Amen.
Return, come back, return, come inward, return, return tonight, return, come back, return, come inward, return, return
Friends, as the Rosh Hashanah and the High Holy Days invite folks who practice Judaism into introspection, self-reflection, and self-awareness, so too we are now using that as an invitation for us into that same practice, both in this service, this week, this year, and in our lives. If you so choose to engage, may it bring you joy, peace, and groundedness. Let us join now in singing our closing hymn, number 1011, Return Again.
This will be familiar to you since the choir just sang it as part of their anthem. We're going to sing it in unison together. The words will be up on the screen or in your hymn book. This is the blue hymn book, 1011. And then we're going to sing it in a round. This means you sing part one. This means you sing part two. And don't worry about getting it right. It will be beautiful. Here we go.
Friends, this has been a very contemplative service. I invite you in that contemplation to feel the love of this gathered community and to hold that love with you as we now say our benediction together. Go out into the world in peace. Have courage. Hold on to what is good. Return to no person evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Support the weak. Help the suffering. Honor all beings. Go and be blessed and be a blessing.